What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I got a request to go over some programming stuff, and so looking for like some insight on frequency and whatnot. So first, I'm going to go over a little bit of what my program looks like, which uh, I do not write. My coach writes that, but obviously I give input. And it's a very collaborative um, partnership that we have between him and I. But then after that, I will go into like what I do to write a program for somebody, and hopefully that provides some insight. And if you want to critique me on how I do that, that's is welcome in the comments. So first, so I'm gonna do the last two blocks before my meet. So my most recent meet. I had 9 weeks in between meets, so this is kind of an unusual circumstance. But we can. The first week would just be. It was kind of like a free week, but with instructions of not, going too heavy. Basically, just to deload. So we can come into this week one um, with under the context of that I just deloaded. So for me, so my typical frequency is going to be squatting twice a week, deadlifting 1.5 times a week, and I will explain that in a second, and then benching 3 times a week. So my split is on day one, which is a Sunday for me. I will do an SBD day, primary deadlifts, and then the other ones are secondaries. Um, and in this context of being, uh, basically in meet prep, but also coming off of one recently, um, we are going to keep specificity high, but the intent of the entire block is just to accumulate some volume. So to kind of build myself back up and get ready for a short peaking window. So I don't know why that says banded speed bench in there, because it was definitely not banded. At least it didn't say that I remember. I definitely didn't do them banded, so just ignore that it says banded on day one. But so we have deadlift. We have a top set of 2 with back downs um, at 80%, and these are all very submaximal for me. So um, if we look through, it goes to deadlift, top set of 2, back down 2 by 2, right? 86 and 80% of my previous best deadlift. And then the next week it goes to 2 set of 2 and then a 1-2. So we're still only doing 3 sets in total, but there is a shift, right? More reps at the higher intensity. And if we keep going, you can probably predict what happens next. But we have 3 sets of 2, and then we do a 3 by 2. So this is quite a big jump in volume on this week. And the reason why that is because when we get to week 4, because I'm going to go into a peaking block, we deload. We're back to basically the same setup as week 1 on deadlift. And squat runs pretty similarly if you look at that for main squatting. We have a top set of 2, 2 by 2, and 2 top sets of 2, and then a 1 by 2, right? And then we hit week 3 as an increase in totality of sets, 2 by 2, 2 by 2. And the reason why it wasn't as big of an increase in deadlift is because previously I had always reported that squat beats me up and deadlift does not. I'm fairly well leveraged for deadlift and not as much for squat. But actually, during this period of time, I kind of figured out a better way to squat for me. But nonetheless, that was the plan, right? So, and then Same thing, we do a volume deload on this week 4. So everything is just all about building volume. Bench runs similarly. We have 2 heavy days, and they both are building up in volume the whole time, and then we deload on the last week. And then if you look at this banded speed bench, and I just don't remember it saying banded. From what I recall, it was tempoed on the descent to help with technique. And speed just meaning like it's fast. I don't really ever lose speed on any rep. I'm not trying to go so light that it I can just move it crazy fast. The point is that as long as I can maintain speed rep to rep, and I'm just riding that line of where maybe if I went up a little bit of weight, the last rep would slow down. And that's how I kind of treat that. So we have bench frequency 3x5 there, and then it goes up 4x5, 4x5, right? And this is like my least priority bench day. But if you look on this day, we have 5x2 at 86% in week 3. But if you go down to week 1, we had a 3x2. So it's a 3x2 to a 5x2. So again, we've built up volume throughout those 3 weeks, kind of building some volume tolerance. Basically, because I just came off a peaking block where volume was a touch lower, you don't want to just jump right back into it. I think that's a mistake that is pretty common, is that, when in typical linear periodization, right, you work from high reps, like a 4x8, and you periodize down a 4x6 to a 3x5, et cetera, and by the end you're doing like 3 sets of 1 or something like that, depending on the program, in a traditional linear periodization model. But then after the meet, it's like, okay, time to run the program again or something similar. You jump right back into like a 4x8. And I think that is probably a mistake because you're just jumping into a ton of volume, while your body is not ready for that. And then the whole idea of preparation is that, we're running this volume so that we can get ready for intensity. Then don't you need to get ready to run volume as well? It's I think it's seen as less risky, in terms of injury risk or whatever, probably because the weights are absolutely lighter. However, I just don't know if that's when your body is desensitized to volume, I don't think you need a 4x8 to create the desired stimulus. In fact, you probably should do a 2x8, 3x8, 4x8, right? Build up to it in that context, right? But anyway, that's a slide little rant. But here you can see my bench. Sorry, getting back to bench on the primary day. We start off with 4 sets on the first week. Now this one kind of undulates in volume a little bit, a 3x2. That's because there's so many other moving things going on with bench with benching 3 days a week. Like this day it's a 4x2, but I also have the single when we drop down on this one, right? It's only a 3x2, no single. This week we do a 4x2, so we're back up. We're up from a 3x2 plus the single, and then on the final week, a deload. So it says optional bench single, but that is a mistake. It's a 2x2. It's super light 2x2 after the heavier 2x2. And just again to reference the what these are in RPE terms is very low. If I went over to this RPE chart, if I went a double, a set of 2 at 86%, like you see on the top line of that deadlift there, a double at 86% is around RPE 7. And with the way my strength kind of is, how do I say this? These are like these E1RMs are based off of, well, it's changed now. Oh, I'm on the wrong program, the wrong tab again. Got to go back over here. Here we go. So these are based on a 605 deadlift. The thing is, in my last meet, the meet that this is based off of, I deadlifted 601 on my second, and I failed 629. My deadlift strength is actually, or was, around 615 to 620. But before we started this block, I told my coach, I said, well, the thing is, I'm making progress off of these lower, training maxes, then why would we up them, right? They just, why incur more fatigue? Especially with kind of like an experimental, less important total-wise meet coming up. But I digress. So that means that even though that, this rep and that percentage equals roughly an RPE 7, that's a percentage of an old training max is what I'm getting at. So they really were actually like, everything was like RPE 6 almost. And maybe when we get to like the week 3, that was week 4. Well, when I get to week 3, maybe I'm doing a 3x2. So maybe that last set's getting a little bit hard of three doubles, and rising above that RPE 6, depending on how much rest I'm taking and whatnot. I'm not really going to talk about accessories too much. There isn't a whole lot that I think you can glean from on this. There's a lot more accessories on the like health end of the spectrum, opposed to like the getting jacked end of the spectrum. So, and that's by design. And keep in mind, like, this program is entirely unique to me, right? So, we're going to go to October, and we're running the same frequency. Now, there's just like some slight changes, right? Like, we're running more intensity. Week 1, we're doing a much higher intensity on double. Back downs are heavier as well. And then week 2, we were taking some singles, but still pretty low for a single. He tells me to cap into RP 7-8, so that's what I did. Week 3, these are last heavy lifts. We get into some singles, and it's RPE 8-9 capped, and that's kind of like where you get like an idea of where your strength is. For me, on deadlift, I get a pretty good amount out of a taper. So week 4, we taper. There's nothing hard here at all. This is, we're just going through the motions, trying to maintain some fitness while dissipating fatigue. That's it. The deadlift, right? Like, I took my last heavy deadlift at 595, and right, like, obviously I capped the RPE 8-9. It probably moved like a 9. My heaviest deadlift at the meet was 623, and it was successful. So I get a lot out of a taper there. And even on squat, especially with the way this is set up, right? I'm taking my last heavy squat a few days after last heavy deadlift. I'm probably carrying some fatigue from that. I took my last heavy squat at 512, and on meet day I hit 540. So these percentages are in here more as a guide of roughly where I want to be. But if we go to where I actually log my training, and this is something that I use for myself that helps me, it keeps my estimated E1RMs in there. I don't estimated E1RM, that's redundant. My E1RMs, which is estimated 1 rep max, in there. So when I'm looking for what I can do at like an RPE 9, this is the RTS website. They have a free training log on here. And so, for example, let's see here. Yeah, I have a squat on this day, right? So this is what it looks like. And when I'm putting it in here for my target, right? Like I've already done this work, as you can see on the actual, what it ended up being on this day. And then yeah, here you go. This was my last heavy squat. But based on this E1RM of 536 that you see right here, right? So now at this point, it's been established. I don't know what the program currently, or what the app currently has my estimated 1RM at, but assuming that this wasn't past tense, I go to my workout planner. I'd load a single at an 8, or in this case, it was like an 8, 9. I'm going to veer towards the 9, let's be honest. We want to lift heavy. And it says a single at 9 would be a 515 right now, based off of my most recent estimated 1RM, which it has it at 540. So that must be, because I actually logged my meet in here to have this feed my data in here too. So there you go. That's how I set it up. That's how I know how to pick my weights, all that good stuff. So let's go into what a program looks like for somebody that I'm coaching. I'm going to look at Thomas here because I have some data on him. I've already made, and I was recently digging through it and working on his program. So the first thing I'm going to, we are about to finish up my third block, or our third block together. And so I have block reviews written on the first 2 blocks, as I've labeled them off-season block 1 and 2. I ran a meta block review on those 2 blocks. So that's what we're going to look at. When I first started working with him, I didn't have a ton of information to go off of. He had been, self-coaching, but really was just kind of running a sort of a 531-esque template program. So really, when I was designing his program, it was more so based off of like things that are just typical to go by, and also like any variations were just based off of like technical stuff. Not weak point per se, but things that I think could be better from a technique perspective. But when we get to writing this current block, which I'm not fully done yet, but we can kind of get an idea of how I go about it. So I ran this meta block on his first 2 blocks, and I have to keep in mind because we're almost done with the third block, but this gives me something to look at. There isn't a ton of data here to go with, but what I do know is that his first 2 blocks worked extremely well for his squat, and I would have known that even without like looking at this. Thomas is an experienced lifter. He's got 10 years-ish training age. For him to put on, an estimated 35 pounds on his squat from beginning to end of the block is crazy. That's not like 35, like he added 35 pounds to his max, but it means that like from the beginning, from like his lower, I don't want to say this, lower fitness state to his higher fitness state. But I think the craziest part about it is that his best squat ever before we started working together was 375. And by the end of the second block, his estimated 1 rep max was 406. So in 8 weeks, we put an estimated 30 pounds on his squat, which is pretty wild in 8 weeks. So basically, I just knew when I'm writing this current one, his upcoming block, and thinking about how the one is going now. The one going now is prioritizing singles. It's not a bad block per se, but I can tell his squat isn't responding as well. And so we're going to run the second block is what I think is going to work the best. And obviously, he's going to be a little bit, desensitized. Not desensitized. He's going to be pretty adapted to my training processes. And I don't think we're going to see this type of gain going forward. But again, I don't have a lot of data to work on, but it's what I do have. So we're going to go with it and hope that it works, especially because we're going to be inside of our 12-week period. So we want to try to do what we know is going to work and less experimenting. But I want to talk about his bench mostly because this is the lift that started off going pretty well. His best bench ever is 275. I have not seen a video of it, but he told me it was ugly. Butt came off the bench. So he just estimated that he could probably bench 260. Like, it's probably like his 1 rep max, like at the moment, or at that moment. By the end of the first block, his E1RM is 269, and the second was 264. So it's almost like we took a step backwards. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we didn't get stronger if his 1 rep max went down. We just haven't found the formula, or I hadn't found the formula to properly express strength and leverage that expression in training. Right? Like, if we can touch heavier weights in training, we're probably going to get a better response long term. Like, get more adaptation, right? Because if we're touching heavy weights, your body has to get stronger. So, now obviously that doesn't mean just go out and max out every day, because we just can't recover from that. So that's the name of the game, is figuring out how can we build fitness by touching heaviest weights possible, while not limiting recovery to a point where we just can't recover. So if I look at this, right, look at his this heat map here. Again, not a lot of data to go off of here, right? This is pretty dry, but it's telling me that triples at 6.5 are what elicited the best performances. If I look at N1RM and peak 1RM, it's telling me the same thing, and gain, even the same thing there. And when I look at what we're running right now, if I also look at his sheet, which we'll look at next, there was a lot of data in there to make me believe that the changes that we made along the way were not the best for his bench. And that's based off of like performance that's happening basically right now. Down here we have assistance exercises. There isn't a lot of data in any of that yet, right? So again, this is pretty small amount of data to go off of, but it's at least something to stick in the back of your mind. These triples at 6.5 have worked well, whereas the singles have not worked so much. Like, the warmer the color, the better it is. Okay, so let's look at his sheet. And if I look at the earliest block, the earliest block in what seemed to work the best, sorry. In here, in the sheet where I write the program to begin with, it looks like we were running 14 sets a week on bench. See if we can see that there. And 43,000 pounds of tonnage on the for the whole block. Basically around 10 to 11,000 pounds of tonnage on bench through the whole for each week. I try to stabilize volume personally, like try to find the right amount of volume that works and just run that. Now, while we saw pretty good response for this, he started dealing with kind of like some pec tendonitis, right? Like, it was a little bit of overuse. So we had to switch some things around to combat that, even though we were seeing pretty solid progress. It's worth noting too that we changed his grip. We widened his grip. Technique was a lot different. So I think it was just too much all at once. So we get into this block, right? We went from 14 sets, and I tried a small reduction, 12 sets, 9,400 tonnage. We still saw some progress this block, but it was not as good, which makes sense, right? Like not as much volume. But the pec was still kind of lingering. So when we get to this final block here, we're running 10 sets, 6,000 pounds of tonnage in the final week. That is not a lot compared to, right? Like that is like almost half of what we were running. Oh, I don't have my top sets in here. So it's probably like 2/3 of what we were running the whole block. Some of that is intentionally reducing sets, obviously, but also when we get to the third block, the plan was to prioritize singles over our top rep set, and that did not work as well. So here comes the conundrum of, okay, well, we know the volume is needed. We also know that his pec has started acting up towards that. So I think what we started doing too is a lot of like back down work and secondary days or closer grip to take some of the stress off of the pec tendon. But so we're going to continue with that plan. But the other thing that we want to do is we're going to work at an absolute lower intensity. So how can I keep volume high while working at lower without overloading the tendon too much? And I think the solution is going to be running lower intensity, higher volume overall. We're going to try to keep some intensity in there by running variation singles on his secondary and tertiary days. So we're going to do a single at with a tempo, right? And then here we're going to do a single with a 3-count pause. So they're going to be lighter based on that, but we can still work on position, touch something that's a little bit heavier, but it's also load limiting. I may have just repeated myself there, but I think you get the idea, right? So, but everything else, close grip, closer grip, right? So after the single, we're doing close grip stuff all around, absolute lower intensities. This says RPE 7 in there, but that is wrong for that back down. That's going to be a lot lower than that. These weights are actually going to change too, just because I haven't updated his training maxes from what we're about to hit in a few days. But that's the plan, right? So yeah. And then we noticed, like, again, we didn't have a lot of data, but triples at 6.5 seem to work off well. And so we're going to do lots of triples at 6.5. We're going to prioritize the first triple, right, at 6.5, so it'll be a little bit heavier. But it's going to stay there the whole time. And then we'll do the single, and then we'll probably have to drop down in weight in order to maintain that RPE. So that is the plan for his bench. And if there was a lot to go on for squat and deadlift, like if it wasn't working, then we would probably be digging into this as well. But the squat and deadlift have been responding well, so it's basically just more of the same. Thomas has a copy of this sheet so he can look it over and decide and see the plan, the overarching plan. Anytime I write like top sets, we're going to default to RPE, but the back offs I'd run them at percentage to control progression, make sure we're not, getting too strong too quick kind of thing. Or not that we're not getting too strong too quick. We can that's never a problem. But if we're getting strong really quickly and all of our weights are going up subsequently, that could just runs a little higher risk of injury and run into things like overuse issues. But anyway, so by the time, he has access to that sheet, but I use that sheet as a guide and I program him in day by day based off of the previous week's performance. So once he hits this day 4, week 3, I'll be able to, it'll update estimated 1RMs on all of those movements right here. And then I will be able to program that next day. So, and just by the nature of how I like working on this stuff, I tend to touch it every day. It's going to be updated basically as he does as he does it. Yeah, but that's it. That's how I program. That's an insight on my program. And frequencies are like with someone without any data, we run pretty basic 2 times squat, 2 times deadlift, and 3 times bench. That's probably where I'm going to go for most people. If they are like a bigger lifter, we'll probably lower frequency on some lifts or maybe even all of them. And I guess the last thing is I never explained what I meant by 1.5 times frequency deadlift. Basically, my secondary deadlift day is RDLs. It's not competition. It's more volume based. There's no like top set. So it's still a deadlift like frequency, but it is a variation, and it's not from the floor. And RDLs are typically thought of more as like an assistance exercise, but I'm running them as my primary exercise on that day. But that's all I got, guys. This video was much longer than I expected it to be, but thanks for hanging on if you made it this far, and we'll catch you on the next one.